Magandang gabi po mga katipon sa Pilipinas. Ito po ang ating katipunan, muling sumasa inyo mga tagapakinig upang magbigay ng mahalagang impormasyon, magbigay liwanag at higit sa lahat ay makinig sa inyong mga daing at puro-puro hinggil sa mga problemang patuloy na nagpapahirap sa ating kalagayan at kabuhayan. Sa susunod na oras, sisikapin po namin ipaliwanag ang iba't ibang bahagi ng ekonomiya at mga mabibigat na local at international issues na may malaking epekto sa ating buhay at kinabukasan. Ito po ang inyong katipon na si Cathy Cruz. Kasama pa rin ang iba nating mga katipon mula sa Save the Nation Movement at ang mga kasama natin mula sa Zoom na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makibahagi sa ating talakayan sa pagsusuri ng mga kasalukuyang problema at paghahanap ng kaukulang solusyon. Magandang gabi po sa lahat ng ating mga kababayan, anuman po ang inyong ginagawa, saan man po kayo naroroon. Muli na naman po tayong sumasahimpapawid sa pamagitan po ng mga social media accounts ng Katipunan Channel sa ating pong mga FB page. Yan, FB page ng Partido KBP at syempre sa ating YouTube account. No? At sabayan niyo po kami napapakinggan sa pamagitan po ng radyo sa RMN DZXL 558 kHz po sa AM band. At nawa ay samahan niyo po ako sa 2 oras dahil meron po tayong panauhin ngayong gabing ito. No? At mamaya ay makakapanayan po natin siya kung ano po ang reaksyon niya tungkol sa mga kaganapan po dito sa ating bansa. At bakit nga ba kritikal ngayon ang sitwasyon ng ating bansa, no? At magandang ibahagi ko rin po sa inyo, no, ang isang video na nauugnay at masasabi nating solusyon na dapat gawin dahil ayon sa kasaysayan po ng buong mundo, ito pong solusyon na ginawang ito na kung tawagin po natin, ito yung Treaty of Westphalia na siyang naging tampok na salita po ni Professor Valdes noong September 15, 2019. Pero bago ko po ibigay ang video po na yan, ay nais ko lang po batiin yung ating mga kababayan na nakatunghay po ngayon sa ating pong social media accounts, no? At marami pong salamat sa pagsama nyo o subaybay nyo po sa ang ating katipunan. At asahan nyo po ilang tulog na lang ay makakasama na natin ang tunay na bida ng palatuntunan ito na si Valdes. So most probably ito pong pagdating po ng Marso ay siya na po ang makikita natin dito. At ako po nakaalalay lamang po dyan dito sa ating palatuntunan. Anyway, maligayang pakikinig po sa ating mga suki, lalo na kay Ma'am Cora Baluyot, no? At kay Mananglita Ramos, nako, at hopefully, minsan wala kasi tayo sa studio, pero kung kakayanin mo, Mananlita, kung ikaw ay nakikinig, no, ay magpatulong ka na makasama ka namin sa Zoom, no, kahit Zoom lang, kahit walang camera. At syempre, ang pamilya Alug nga rin pala kay Sister Virgie at saka kay Alan, no? Magandang gabi sa inyo. At syempre kay Wilbert Lamarca ng Komisyon ng Wikang Pilipino, magandang gabi sa inyo. At ang pamilya ang mag-ina ni Joel Nagit, no, na nakikinig ngayon, si mag-ina rin na April M. Diolica Serial diyan sa lungsod ng Quezon. At ang Rolet Dev family na nakikinig mula sa Laguna. At syempre, nako, ito baka magtampo na naman to si Engineer Lemmy Rojas. ang lead convener ng Save the Nation Movement. Magandang gabi sa inyo, Engineer. Sana makasama kita sa Zoom, no? Nako, si Ber kasi. Joke lang. Pero maraming salamat po sa ating technical team, no? Dahil alam niyo po, malaki pong nagagawa ng ating technical team dito sa ating Katipunan channel, sila Ver, Archivido at Roxanne Suba. At syempre lalo na ang ating DZXL family, ang mga technician po natin dyan na nakaalalay po sa ating studio sa DZXL, no? At anyway, yan, yung pagbati nga pala, happy birthday nga pala kay Mina Navarro. Yan, siya ang treasurer ng National Press Club. Magandang gabi sa inyo dyan sa MPC. Anyway, magpatuloy na tayo sa ating palatuntunan at ngayon pong February 26, no? 26 na po ngayon. At panoorin po muna natin ang pangungusap na ibinigay po ni Professor Butch Valdes noong September 15, 2019 sa kauna-unahang konbensyon na ginanap po dito sa Pilipinas, ang First Convention ng World Philosophical Forum. Panoorin po natin.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Good evening. I am the last speaker, and maybe a sign of relief for some people. But being the last speaker has certain advantages. As everybody knows, you also have the last say. I was asked to give a summary of sorts or a communique on what might be a resolution, what might embody a resolution of the WPF Philippines in regard to this particular conference. So I tried my best. And again, being the last, I found the inspiration in the statements being made by President Igor Kardashian, as he spoke of the vision that he had of the WPF and the importance of philosophy and sublime thought. Let me go through this very quickly. I cannot overemphasize the strategic value of an international conference of this nature and composition. Conventions of various kinds organized by groups and associations continue to be held all over the world, but to my humble knowledge, none has been convened of this nature and purpose. It is not organized by any religious organization, yet it is full of spirituality. It is not organized by any political and ideological group, yet it addresses the concern of the whole world's population. And that the conference is held here in the Philippines is indicative of the fact that the sovereignty of all nations, large or small, rich or poor, is a recognized principle. In the context of the current political and economic crisis now confronting the world, the Middle East conflict in Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Iran, the Israeli-Palestinian impasse, the Venezuelan-Argentinian-Brazil economics, the Korean Peninsula, and the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea territorial issues. Tension has risen to unprecedented and historical levels, threatening global conflict which could very well annihilate present civilization. where 30,000 or more nuclear warheads are in the possession of the superpowers. At 20 megatons each, ready to be unleashed in a war of total destruction with capability of killing the world's population 20 times over. While the hegemony of the Western powers is seen to be waning, their control over the world's monetary system collapsing, their economies in process of collapse as well, the US, UK, France, Germany, and allies have given indication of asserting themselves militarily in various regional theaters. The US pivot of 60% of the mighty naval power to the Southeast Asia, of which the Philippines is right at the center, has heightened a general apprehension not only on our people, but to the people of Southeast Asian nations and China. The causes of conflict have not changed over the history of mankind. Man, motivated by power and greed, tries to control and overpower his fellow man. These result in revolutions by the oppressed to change the oppressors, resulting in wars and world wars. But the strategic question confronting us today, as we have heard in the past few hours, what the problems of the world are. The whole civilization is actually threatened with extinction. If we want to create a new world order of peace and development to ensure survival and prosperity for all nations, how do we achieve this? A historical and important precedent is what was done after the 30 Years' War in the Peace of Westphalia. The end of the 30 Years' War was in 1648. It was a war which rampaged in waves, vicious and violent for 30 years, involving many countries, including Germany, the Habsburg or Austria, Hungary, France, Sweden, Bohemia or Czech Republic, Denmark, Spain, and the Netherlands. The Peace of Westphalia, when all the war parties came together, was the first time that the European community of sovereign states was established. And it was only possible because all of its members recognized each other as having equal legal standing and guaranteed each other their independence. It was clear that this not only required goodwill, but a minimum of efficient guarantees. Most important was the idea that the raison d'être, the reason for its existence, the identity of this new alliance of community of nation states could never be only for self-preservation. It would be morally justified if it realized ideas and principles which had a higher unifying purpose than just survival of themselves. Such principles exist in the Treaty of 1648. Some were expressed for the first time in history. These negotiations lasted for 4 years. In the end, the Protestants, Catholics, monarchies, Republican forms of government were treated as having equal status in the negotiations on the treaty. The peace treaty defined the principles of sovereignty and equality in numerous subcontracts, and in this way became the constitution of a new system of states. Cardinal Mazarin, as the leader of France, the ascendant nation among others, is credited with initiating a move towards peace, the guarantees of independence, recognition of sovereignty, the cessation of hostilities, and forgiveness of damages done to life and properties were the result of the principle laid down by the leaders of the nations. And to paraphrase the portion of that historical document, it reads, Article 1 of the Peace Treaty states, I quote, "And this peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other, and that both forms, from the side of the entire Roman Reich and the Kingdom of France, as well as the other way around, from the Kingdom of France with the Roman Reich, a faithful neighborhood should be renewed and flourish for peace and friendship and flourish again." The agreement called for the principle of the advantage of the other, which meant all proposals coming from every country involved must be to the advantage of the other. This is a very precious idea. It is essential to have peace. It is the idea of Nicholas of Cusa, who had in the 15th century that said that peace in the microcosm is only possible when you have the development of all microcosms. You can only have peace among different nations if each nation develops itself fully and regards as its self-interest to develop the others fully as well. The Treaty of the Peace of Westphalia states that peace is the highest goal of the community states. It was the first time that the framework was created where a different principle from that of the limitless right of the victorious party was implemented. The principle of might is right. This was a gigantic step forward in international law, where might is not right, and the stronger should not necessarily prevail. The present ongoing dispute here in Southeast Asia, particularly the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, is a case which we believe may find resolution among the principles I have described above. Ideally, the Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte may consider convening the 10 ASEAN countries to propose to all countries involved the very principles which have found acceptance in Europe in 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. Consider the following. First, that China and the 10 member nations of the ASEAN may convene into a non-aggression treaty and committing to a mutually beneficial agreement of exploiting the resources of the disputed waters. Second, guarantee the freedom of navigation to all commercial and military vessels intending to use the Straits of Malacca, going to and from their own respective destinations. Third, to encourage the construction of the Crab Canal in Thailand, in order to decongest the Malacca Straits and provide all countries with an alternative route for benefit of all populations. Fourth, a demilitarization of the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. The whole Southeast Asia should ban military bases for nuclear weapons. Fifth, for China and the ASEAN countries to propose assistance to the United States in rebuilding its infrastructure, which is now deteriorating. Requirements, especially a network of fast rail systems and accommodation of mutually beneficial demands of fair trade. No less than the renowned philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, in his Ethics, Law and Civilization in 1693, in reference to the Peace of Westphalia principles, said that charity is universal benevolence, and benevolence is the habit of loving. Moreover, to love is to take delight in the happiness of another, or what amounts to the same thing. It is to regard another's happiness as one's own. End of quote. We all must realize that China Sea dispute is not merely a Philippines-China problem. It in fact has global security implications, just as in many other regional disputes. It is not enough that a treaty be signed by the parties without efficient assurances that all will abide. It is also difficult to enforce where leaders change and so may their motivations. But what will bind the countries more must necessarily include the beneficial effect on all their populations, an economic order which assures development and prosperity for all. Working towards peace in Europe, Cardinal Mazarin and Jean-Baptiste Colbert closely studied the river systems in the end in view of enhancing commerce and economic activity between the North and Southern Europe. The rivers Rhine, the Vistula, Oder, the Elbe, Weser, and the Ems. These rivers were being used as territorial boundaries. Instead, he sought to make them as economic corridors to enhance development and communication. Mazarin understood that peace among nations must necessarily include a collaboration towards the prosperity of all if it is to last. Today, what better manifestation of this principle can be understood in the promotion of a historic effort by man, now committed to by 130 countries, to implement the One Belt, One Road project, now known as the Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to construct economic corridors of high-tech, fast rail systems which connects all 7 continents of the world by land. We will soon be able to travel around the world by land and transport cargo by land on a transportation system which can travel up to 1,000 miles per hour. The impact on the world commerce with this facility is obvious. Another great historical project of this century that continues to give us hope, which is ongoing and has enjoined all the superpowers, is the Moon-Mars project. The collaborative efforts of the US, China, Russia, India, including Japan, France, and Germany, are planning to land a team of astronaut engineers and scientists on the moon, construct a base station, and use the same to launch another team for man to land in Mars. The stated moon landing goal is 2025. It is highly possible that before the decade is over, man will be well on its way towards realizing a collective effort in making another giant leap for mankind towards the colonization of Mars. Then, as now, mankind is at a crossroads. One path leads to war, despair, and destruction. The other leads to hope, prosperity, and development for the coming generations. With the powers given to us by our Creator, there are no limits to growth. As history has taught us, if we are motivated by the common good and act benevolently to the advantage of the other, we will learn to use our rivers and our oceans and even outer space, not as territorial boundaries, but rather as corridors for commerce, economic, and scientific activity to enhance the quality of life of all human beings on this planet. It is my fervent hope that we, citizens of the world, patriots of our respective countries, use this defining historical moment to be the spark that ignites the spirit of a new world renaissance. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Butch.
Yun. So, napanood po ninyo ang speech na ginawa po ni Professor Butch Valdes noong September 15, 2019. Alam niyo po habang ako po kasi yung nagbibideo dyan at habang sinasabi ito, binibigkas ito ni Professor Butch, kinikilabutan po ako. At mararamdaman mo doon sa mismong pagpupulong o kapulungan na yon ay talagang tahimik ang mga tao na nakikinig sa kanya, mataman talaga na nakikinig sa kanya. At may buhit sa puso yung kanyang mensahe. At 5 punto yung kanyang sinabi ni Professor Butch kung paano masusolusyonan yung nagaganap na pagtatalo dito sa Timog Silangang Asya, particular dito sa South China Sea o West Philippine Sea. Na ngayon, maihahambing ko rin na ito yung kasalukuyang nangyayari na talagang napapagitnaan ang ating bansa sa pagitan ng Amerika at ng China. 5 punto yung sinabi ni Professor Butch doon na solusyon. Sabi nga niya pwede namang kung nagawa noong mga panahon na yon, itong Treaty of Westphalia, bakit hindi pwedeng gawin ngayon? Diba? Sabi nga niya, una, ang China at ang 10, ito yung kanyang 5 punto na lunas o kalutasan sa problema sa South China Sea. Yung China raw at ang 10 miyembrong bansa ng ASEAN ay maaaring magpulong sa isang kasunduan na hindi agresyon at mangako o pumasok sa isang kasunduan na kapwa kapaki-pakinabang sa mga mapagkukunan o pinagtatalo ng tubig, diba? Ibig sabihin, sabi nga ni Professor nung ine-explain niya to sa amin off-cam habang kami nagkikwentuhan ni Professor Butch. Sayang yung pagkakataon, matatandaan niyo nung panahon na ito, si President Rodrigo Roa Duterte ang siyang Pangulo ng ASEAN nung panahon na yon. At siya, dahil kumbaga parang nakuha niya yung puso ng liderato ng China dahil, di ba, minura nga niya, nag-birth siya dito sa kay Obama nung pag-upo pa lang niya. Nakita yung tapang na meron siya, nakakaiba. At kumbaga, itong malaking pagkakataon sana nung panahon ni Pangulong Duterte na pulungin niya yung lahat ng 10 miyembro ng bansa ng ASEAN, including China, na pag-usapan at upuan ito na imbis na maging sarilinin lang sino man na bansa, itong mga sabi nating daanan no ng ng karagatan gamitin para sa nga natin ay para sa kapakinabangan ng lahat. Yung pangalawa, ginagarantiyahan yung kalayaan sa paglalayag. Ito na yun yung sinasabi ko sa lahat ng sasakyang pangkomersyo at militar na naglalayong gamitin yung kipot ng Malacca na papunta o manggagaling sa kanilang lokasyon. Guarantee the freedom of navigation to all commercial and military vessels intending to use the straits of Malacca going to or coming from the respective locations. At ang pangatlo, hikayatin ang pagtatayo ng Kritikal sa Thailand upang mabawasan yung pagsisikip ng Malacca at bigyan ang lahat ng alternatibong ruta para sa kapakinabangan ng lahat ng mga bansa. At ang pang-apat ay ang demilitarisasyon ng South China Sea o West Philippine Sea. Dapat ipagbawal ng buong SEA o Southeast Asia ang mga base militar para sa mga sandatahang nuklear o sandatang nuklear. Ito nakakalungkot dahil sa kasalukuyan, obviously, parang taliwas ito doon sa suggestion ni Professor Butch nung panahon na to. Sa panahon ngayon, ilan yung itinadagdag pa nila, diba? At ang panglima, para sa China at ASEAN, na magmungkahi ng tulong sa US sa muling pagtatayo ng mga kinakailangan sa infrastruktura, lalo ng isang network na mabilis na sistema ng release at akomodasyon na kapwa kapaki-pakinabang sa kahilingan ng mga patas na kalakalan. Or for China and the ASEAN to propose assistance to the US in rebuilding its infrastructure requirements, especially a network of fast rail system and accommodation mutually beneficial to demands of fair trade. Kita nyo, ang ganda nung prinsipyo na binabanggit ni Professor Butch. Well, bago ako tuluyang magpatuloy sa aking i-recognize ko lang ang isa sa sinasaluduhan kong Pilipino. Siya ay isang researcher, writer, politics and international relations expert na may tuturing ko, no? Hindi ko na pahabain at pabatiin na natin siya para mas marami tayong makuhang reaksyon sa kanya kung sa ating topic ngayon na yung kritikal na sitwasyon ng ating bansa. Walang iba kundi si Professor Ana Malindog-UY. Magandang gabi sa iyo, Professor Ana.
Magandang gabi, Cathy, at magandang gabi sa ating mga tagapanood, lalo na sa ating mga nasa loob ng ating Zoom, no? Kasi I'm from the Zoom, no? Nagjo-join ako via Zoom. So I'm very happy na kasama ako sa diskusyon ngayon tungkol sa mga critical na issues na nangyayari sa ating bansa, lalo na when you talk about geopolitics at siyempre yung relasyon natin with different countries, especially like China and the United States. At the moment, at iba pang countries tulad ng Japan at kung ano na ang katayuan at kung ano na ang atong diskusyon natin tungkol dito sa mga nangyayaring critical issues ng bansa, no? Na ngayon ay, well, hindi ko nga alam kung mayroong critical mass na nag-uupos, lalo na doon sa sinasabi mo kanina, yung militarization ng tinatawag nating disputed South China Sea or ng Southeast Asia, and the countries now being militarized to a greater extent. So tinitignan ko kung ano yung pulso ng bayan on this, no? At kung talagang makikita mo bang may opposition to this, kasi tayo malinaw na we don't agree with this, but ang tanong is, naiintindihan ba ng ating mga kababayan kung ano ang tinatawag nating impact or magnitude nito at kung ano ang pwedeng maging epekto nito sa ating bansa at kung in terms of relationship natin with different countries, especially sa neighboring country, sa neighbor natin na bansa na ang China, at the same time kung malalim ba ang pagkakaintindi ng ating mga kababayan sa mga nangyayari or nandun lang tayo sa surface. At hindi pa.
O naiintindihan ba talaga ng ating mga kababayan, no? Kasi alam mo, Professor, sa totoo lang, napakaraming suliranin ng ating bansa na hinaharap ngayon. Alam natin na yung ating mga kababayan ay talagang kapos o talagang naghihirap dahil sa sitwasyon ng ekonomiya ng ating bansa. Dinadagdagan pa ng mga problema ng agrikultura at inflasyon, ng mga sabihin na natin mga basic needs ng ating mamamayan, no? Tayong lahat. Kabilang po ako doon. Tapos nandito pa yung mga illegal na droga. Yung peace and order natin, di ba? Unemployment rate natin. Talagang kumbaga ito yung panahon na hindi na lang to basta yung naghihirap ka, hindi lang ito yung panahon na magulo ang iyong paligid, unlike before na kahit paano kampante kang uuwi. Pero ang pinakamalala sa lahat, yung napipintong gera. Dahil may mga leader tayo, may mga mambabatas tayo na parang tuwang-tuwa pa sila na nandito yung base militar ng ating bansa. Anong meron, di ba? So, masakit yun, Professor, sa mga taong naiintindihan yung epekto nito sa buhay. Kasi kung namumblema ka ngayon ng kakainin mo, pero hindi mo alam na baka pag-gising mo, wala na. Buhay pa ba? Diba? Yung existence, yung human extinction kapag dahil hindi na lang to away ng sa bibig lang, Cold War, o sabihin na nating yung barilan lang, hindi diba? Yung impact nito mas malala sa dating nangyari. Diba, Professor? Professor, siguro magandang matalakay mo sa atin in terms of ano ba yung nakikita mo dito sa pagdaragdag ng base militar, etong usapin ng EDCA, gaano ba kalala ang impact nito sa sambayan ng Pilipino, lalo na sa ating bansa? Professor.
Oh, okay. Maraming salamat, Cathy. Sa unang-una, kung titignan mo, ang dimension kasi ng paliwanag ng mga halimbawa, nagsusulong dyan sa full implementation ng EDCA, at the same time, ginajustify nila ang EDCA to a greater extent na kailangan daw ng bansa natin. So in that way, it will give us, it will protect us to a greater extent. Yun kasi yung mga justification na sinasabi, at many of this justification also, ang sinasabi nila, para daw yan sa tinatawag nating disaster relief and operation, something to that effect. So medyo nagtataka lang ako bakit naging climate change ang EDCA bigla. So may mga ganong justification. Pero kung titignan mo, tas security, the issue of security, pero ang ano ko lang kasi dyan, ang comment ko kasi dyan, ang security na usapin ay hindi usapin ng traditional security lang. May tinatawag ka kasing traditional security issues na dapat tugunan ng ating bansa. May tinatawag ka ring human security dimension. Kaso, ang problema lang siguro at the moment, ang ini-emphasize, I hope not, pero ang nakikita ko parang ang ini-emphasize ng ating gobyerno ngayon, yung current government natin is mas nakatutok sila sa tinatawag mong traditional security issues. Ang sinasabi kasi nila, there is such a thing as a threat, a China threat, which is a rhetoric na matagal nang pinopromote at it's a propaganda basically against China na dina-justify nila as the reason for having this what you call EDCA, which is because if you look at EDCA, to 2014 yan sa panahon ni President Noynoy Aquino na railroad yan kasi biglang naging okay yan at executive agreement, kinuntest yan sa Supreme Court na unconstitutional kasi if you really look at the spirit of EDCA in a real sense, it's unconstitutional. Pero right now, sinasabi nilang constitutional daw and it's needed para ma-operationalize mo ang tinatawag mong mutual defense treaty na meron tayo with the United States. So at the moment, if you look at the country, you have 5 EDCA bases. Sinasabi nilang EDCA sites, but actually it's EDCA bases because these are basically U.S. military bases inside our own military bases, Philippine military bases. So, nandun siya sa loob ng military bases natin na nakapalibot sa iba't ibang panig ng Pilipinas. But if you look at the 5 EDCA bases at the moment, these are located in areas which are very sensitive to the issue na tinatawag nating dispute over the South China Sea. Kasi ang South China Sea is disputed. And at the same time, some of it are a little bit facing Taiwan, no? So yun yung 5 EDCA bases na meron. Now, meron ka na nun. Ngayon, ang problema, ang Estados Unidos ay trying to push for additional 4. Actually, 5 yan Nahiya sila masyado, so nireduce nila into 4. Medyo nahiya pa sila ng konti, no? So ginawa nilang 4 na lang, ang sabi ng Estados Unidos. So right now, I think that additional 4 EDCA bases are already a done deal. I think it's already a done deal from the way I see it. So ang tanong doon, so kung titignan mo, may total ka na of 9 EDCA bases. So this will be located in sensitive areas, sensitive in relation to our neighbor, China, because most of them are facing, some of the additional, I think, will be facing Taiwan, which is in the north of Luzon. And then some of them will be a little bit near actually the South China Sea. Now, if you look at the whole Asia-Pacific region, there are 3 what you call flashpoints. This is geopolitics, no? There are 3 flashpoints when you talk about possible conflict, military conflict or confrontation between countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Pag sinabing mong military conflict, this is a possibility of war. Kasi ang war, pwedeng magsimula muna yan sa dalawang bansa and then it will escalate into a total World War III because other countries will be part of it already. It depends, no, of the situation. Like, for example, if you look at Ukraine, right now they say it's between Russia and Ukraine, but actually it's a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Ang nagagamit na buffer na state na parang proxy mo at saka battleground mo is Ukraine. But if you really analyze the Ukraine crisis, it's actually a hybrid war, proxy war between Russia and the United States and the NATO because the United States is a member of NATO. So basically, it's NATO as against Russia, and United States is leading NATO. So yun. So yung sitwasyon na yan sa Eastern Europe or Europe, it might happen in our side in the world, which is the Asia Pacific or Asia as a whole. So right now, if you look at Asia Pacific, there are 3 flashpoints na sinasabi ko. One of that will be the disputed South China Sea. Second of that will be the Taiwan Strait issue. And the third is the the Korean Peninsula, because you have the conflict between the South and the North. So that is the 3 flashpoints that could possibly lead into something we don't want to happen, like a war or a military confrontation between countries. And among these countries, ang dalawang nagigit-gitan in every aspect is dalawa na malalaking countries na superpowers, no? And that's China and the United States. But of course, these countries also, they have their allies. Now, if you look at China and the United States, dalawa ang in all of those flashpoints involve yung dalawa. Kasi if you look at North Korea and South Korea is an ally of the United States. It's one of the countries dito sa Asia Pacific na may tinatawag kang military bases ang United States. And of course, North Korea, ang big brother niya naman is ang China. So in a way, nandun na naman yung dalawang malaking bansa. So South China Sea, ito yung mahirap. Because doon sa sa Korean Peninsula, hindi tayo kasama doon ang Pilipinas. But dito sa disputed South China Sea, kasama tayo kasi we have dispute over different claimant states. And one of the claimant states is China. Vietnam is there, Brunei, China, Taiwan. Well, Taiwan is a province of China, and some few other claimant states. But if you look at the South China Sea, with itong US is there trying to nakikialam sila sa dynamics kasi ng South China Sea when they are not even part of it, and they don't even own anything in the South China Sea.
Nawala si Professor Maalindog. Pero gusto ko lang i-recognize habang may technical issue lang siguro at tignan lang natin, gusto ko lang i-recognize si Giancarlo EY nandito sa Zoom, si Johnny Ventosa, si Jeffrey Balse. At abangan lang natin at merong sino tong LG na to, pakipalitan lang po yung pangalan mo, boss. Kung sino ka man yung LG, sino ba yung LG? At of course si Ed Mitural nandito. Antayin lang natin na pero bigyan natin ng pagkakataon kasi maganda yung sinasabi ni Prof. Ana, no? Ayan na si Prof. Ana. Prof. Ana, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yung problema talaga ang internet sometimes. But hopefully, pag nawawala ako, babalik din ako. Sorry ha. Pasensya na. Ito yung problema kapag internet ka technology is good, but sometimes it's not reliable. may mga glitches din na konti. But anyway, I was explaining na dito sa disputed South China Sea, involved tayo dyan kasi isa tayo sa mga claimant states. So now, ang problema, ang nangyayari dyan, ang expectation kasi natin is supposedly, dapat lang, ma-resolve ang dispute dyan in a peaceful and diplomatic way. Yan talaga ang option mo. Pero ang problema kasi, ang United States, pumapasok siya at nakikialam siya dyan sa South China Sea. And they justify it in the sense na freedom of navigation daw. And then of course, ang isa sa mga kino-co-opt, o what you call co-optation ang nangyayari is the Philippines. Tayo rin nagiging instrument tayo ng United States in many ways para yung kanilang, how do you call that, presence in the South China Sea also will be justified in many ways. And they're saying always na kapag may mga skirmishes dyan sa South China Sea between us and China, it's always between us and China, no? The Philippines and China. Palaging nandyan ang how do you call that, ang United States para, kumbaga, to fan the fire. Instead of trying to calm down, pinafan niya yung fire na para lumago at mag-escalate. Because that is to the United States advantage. Because our relationship with the Chinese will be affected in many ways. So magkakaroon tayo ng hindi magandang relasyon. Though at the moment, I would consider that the Philippines and China, though may mga challenges, I think, with the bilateral relation of the two countries, still I could consider that we still have good relation with China. Kasi China still is the #1 trading partner of the country. But yung challenge nga dyan sa South China Sea ay minamagnify masyado to the point na nagkakaroon ng misperception ang ibang Filipino sa usapin ng South China Sea. Na kailangan natin intindihin ng malalim yung issue na yan kasi as I've said earlier, that is one of the flashpoints in the Asia-Pacific region na pwedeng pagmulan ng tinatawag mong military conflict. At tayo ay madadrag dyan, which hindi naman dapat. So, yan, no? At nakikita nyo naman kung i-relate mo siya sa EDCA, na some of the EDCA bases are actually located near the South China Sea. And if you put it there, it means you're actually provoking the other giant in in the Asia Pacific region, which is China. Na hindi ko rin maintindihan, why do you have to do that? Kasi kung gusto mo ng kapayapaan, you don't provoke a superpower.
Correct.
It is a superpower in our region, in Asia. The United States is a superpower probably, but it's not the only power at the moment. It is one of the major power, but not the only power that is ready and, capable of waging any kind of war with any country. You have a superpower in our region that is China. So ang ano ko dyan is, why do you provoke the giant, the dragon, when in fact you can actually negotiate? Negotiation is not easy. It's always hard. There's no such thing as easy in this kind of issues. But I think that's the most preferred way if you want to preserve regional peace and stability, and also peace in our country. Kasi if you push and you say na, okay lang kasi I have my big brother, the United States, we have the MDT. At the end of the day, kapag ginanyan-ganyan mo ang iyong rhetoric, kahit naman may MDT ka, at the end of the day, ang problema dyan, ang kawawa dyan tayo. Kasi kapag nagkabakbakan, hindi naman actually how do you call that, ang US ang tatamaan ng mga bala dyan at mga missile, tayo pa rin eh. So tayo talaga ang kawawa dyan. Kahit balik ta rin mo man ang mundo, kahit tayo ang kawawa dyan. So kumbaga, ang Pilipinas kailangan maging wise on these things. But the problem is, andyan na yung EDCA bases. Andyan na rin yung 4 na additional bases. Tapos, mayroon ka pang usapin na magde-deploy ng more troops on the ground from the US troops. And then, mayroon pang usapin na tinatawag mong joint patrol or maritime patrol in the South China Sea, disputed South China Sea. These are all provocation against China. These are all provocation. When you say provocation, iniinis mo yung tao, iniinis mo yung kabila. Bakit mo iinisin?
Para bang yung Prof. Ana, para bang dinuduro-duro mo siya?
Oo, yung iniinis mo ba? Inuunggit-unggit mo ba?
Diba? Patulan ka niya. Diba?
Yan nga kasi
pinagmamalaki ng bansa natin, pinagmamalaki natin, yung big brother natin na Estados Unidos. Ang layo-layo niya.
Layo niya
Maapektuhan tayo dahil tayo yung magkatapi. Pagka nagkaroon ng gulo, tayo yung unang sasalpukin.
Yes, tama yun. At saka, take note, ang sinasabi nila lagi, MDT, we will invoke MDT. During the time that there was this issue of the laser beam na people call it military grade, but I think on the side of China, they explain what do you mean by military grade and explain their side. There was one person, I think it was Carpio, Attorney Carpio, who said this is a violation of sovereignty. We have to invoke the MDT, blah, blah, blah. May mga ibang mga personalities, political personalities, and some personalities in the country was saying na, invoke natin yung MDT, blah, blah, blah. Sabi ko, do you really understand what do you mean by this? When you invoke the MDT against you're declaring a war against China. And do you really think it's good for the country? Do you really think we will survive as a country? Oh my God! You know what? These are loose words that some people they would say this easily without even trying to think deeply kung anong impact nito at kung paano tayo piniperceive ng ibang countries, especially ng countries na sinisingle out natin. So yun yung sometimes parang, bakit? Why do you have to be like this when in fact you can resolve the issue by, trying to come up with a middle ground? Kasi sa issue ng South China Sea, I'll be very frank about it and very pragmatic the way I see it. This is not anymore an issue of right and wrong. This is an issue of striking a middle ground. A middle ground is important because that's the only way para lahat ng bansa na nag-aagawan dyan magkaroon ng understanding. Because if you push, if you have this kind of zero-sum game, like this is ours, this is yours, this is ours, this is yours, there's no understanding in that. And no one will say that I mean, China will not say, okay, sa'yo na yan. No, of course not. So, ang way talaga dyan is negotiate peacefully, diplomatically, and agreed with the middle ground. Now, if you cannot, and there's a way for that, like you agree, like for example, fishing. Probably they can agree, no? Our government and some of the claimant states can agree, like, okay, in fishing, probably you can fish here for 2 days. I will fish here for 3 days. Something like that. It's a middle ground. That it's not a zero-sum game, because a zero-sum game would lead you to a conflict, a war with the country. And that is not the way to go. So yun ang problema.
So sa madaling salita, Professor Ana, kumbaga, hindi yung issue na sino ba talaga may-ari niyang isla na yan. Yung mga bato dyan sa...
Yeah, mga bato-bato dyan.
West Philippine Sea. Hindi issue yun di ba? Kumbaga parang definitely, katulad din natin, I'm sure, na hindi rin tayo papayag na hindi naman natin amin yan di ba? Sino ba naman na kahit sa tao, di ba? Hindi mo sasabihin na hindi akin yan. Siyempre, aariin mo rin iyo, di ba? Pero, makikipaggera ka ba? Makikipag-away ka ba? Pwede naman nating upuan yan, magkasundo tayo, para nating pakinabangan kung ano man ang meron dyan, di ba? At hindi lang pakinabangan, kundi hindi away ang solusyon sa ganito. Dahil knowing na, ito nga kasi, alam naman natin, Professor, na ang tindi ngayon rin ang problema ng ating bansa pagdating sa agrikultura, sa ekonomiya, yung inflation natin. And kumbaga, ang laki rin ng malaki ba yung natutulong din ng bansang China sa atin pagdating sa ganyang mga issue, yung pag-import din ng mga products at pag-export din ng mga products, vice versa, 'di ba? Kasi kumbaga kung ang iisipin natin yung fair trade, yung pakikipagkalakalan, na yun naman talaga yung laging layunin ng bansang China, 'di ba? At hindi naman pakikipag-away o sabihin nating mag-conquer siya ng parte ng bansa natin. Hindi naman yun di ba? Sa kasaysayan, meron bang ganon, Professor Ana?
Sa kasaysayan ng China, they're not an imperial state. Actually, they're not. They're actually ang kasaysayan ng China, kung titignan mo, ay very similar to the Philippines in terms of experience. As tayo na colonized din tayo, they were colonized as well. They experienced colonization. They experienced as well, like the impact of imperialism in their country. They experienced that. It's the same experience. It's the same feeling that they have, what we have as Filipinos. Kasi tayo na-experience natin yan We were exploited. They were exploited by the West. We were exploited by the West. That's why they are, kumbaga, we have supposed to be the same sentiment. But the problem is that Philippines is very Americanized in many ways and brainwashed by American Western media. So that's why. And we look at, that's the problem with so many Filipinos as well, no? We don't have that sense of pride that we are Filipinos. Kulang yun When we see people na puti, parang tingin natin they're superior than us. It's in the psyche of most Filipinos. That's why you look, lahat karamihan ng Pilipino gustong pumunta ng Amerika kasi feeling nila pagdating sa Amerika ang ganda ng buhay nila. But actually hindi ganun. Ang totoo doon, nagiging what? TNT, housekeeper and all. Because that is a colonial mentality na sometimes kailangan natin matanggal sa utak natin. Kasi that keeps us a colony. Yung mental na colonial mentality is a very important factor for us as Filipinos na dapat matanggal yan. Na hindi dapat we don't look at people just because they are white that they're already superior than us. No, of course not. So yun yung isa sa mga factor kung bakit when you talk about politics and even geopolitics in the Philippines, nandyan yan, lumalabas yan na America is here for us and they will help us. As if we cannot do it on our own, as if we cannot negotiate on our own. Diba? I mean, that's something that...
At saka, Prof. Ana, ang nakakatawa dito, ang palabas nila, disaster relief, diba?
Yeah, climate change.
Climate change. And then, ang sasabihin nila, tumutulong sa mga troops natin, sa military natin dito, tutulong nila, etc. And yet, habang ipapalabas nila na magtuturo para mas sophisticated daw ang mga gamit o whatever. Pero, sige naman ang bagsak dito ng mga kasundaluhan ng Amerikano. Diba?
Oh, talagang nagsisend sila ng troops. Yeah.
Exactly. Kung ako, yung bansang China, o anumang bansa na nakikita sa labas ng Pilipinas, at nakikita natin bakit dumarami ang mga Amerikanong sundalo sa Pilipinas. Anong meron? 'Di ba? Ano bang makikipag na to? Para bang Ukraine ang pwedeng mangyari sa bansa natin, Professor Ana?
Yun nga yung sinasabi ko kasi I mean if you look at that many analysts, geopolitical analysts, military and defense analysts, especially in the West, especially in America, they have this notion that impending war with China is coming. So it's them who actually tells the public about it, even in their own newspapers. Makikita mo may mga publication on that. May mga generals, US generals who are telling some people even in Western newspaper na yun nga, they are trying to prepare for some kind of war with China, and they're having this war games against China. Ang target is China, even in the United States defense and security framework, I think. They identify, there are documents about it, na-identify na nila na ang China ang kanilang competitor, ang kanilang kalaban, and almost every aspect, no? And they are trying to propagandize that. Kumbaga, ang Western media, naka-ano na rin yan naka-built in na sa Western media to demonize China in many ways, because precisely the United States identify it as already as the competitor. And the problem with the United States is hindi nila kayang tanggapin na there is such a thing as a competitor. There's such a thing as an impending there's such a thing as a competing power na ang mundo ay hindi na about the United States. It's not only the United States that can dictate or can control the world. No, it's not anymore. There's a contending power rising, and China is one of that. And it's not only actually China, you have Russia actually, pero ang problema, yun nga, you have the Ukraine crisis. The purpose of that is to weaken Russia. Now, dahil nandito yung China rising as a contending power, they want also to weaken China by waging probably a limited or a proxy war with China, using probably the country. That's one possibility. So, yun yung mga possibilities na nangyayari. Kaya ang nangyayari ngayon, they're trying really to convince the current government na, like for example, EDCA is good and EDCA is needed by the country. So, pag sinabi mong full implementation of EDCA, di ibig sabihin, yung mga pagtatayo ng mga military bases sa Pilipinas will be there, and deployment of military assets ng United States will be inside the country kasi magde-deploy din sila, deployment of troops. Ang problema dito, unang-una, that's not within the spirit of the 1987 Constitution. Kung titignan mo ang Constitution natin ngayon, 1987, maraming loopholes yan. Pero ang pinaka-importanting tignan sa mga usapin nito is anong sinasabi ng Constitution natin? We should promote or we should uphold independent foreign policy. But with the current situation going on, ang nangyayari sa current government natin, sa administrasyon na to, is it's not pursuing independent foreign policy if you're leaning toward one country. Because supposed to be, it should be neutral. And everything should be based on our national interests. So, ang national interest natin is mag-exist at mag-survive bilang country, not to be destroyed and be a proxy. Paro-paro pang hindi gano'n nangyayari. Pangalawa, deployment of troops. Hindi dapat nandito sa Pilipinas kasi nasa Constitution natin yan Pangatlo is military bases. Dapat walang military bases dito sa Pilipinas. Pero ang tanong kasi dyan is sinasabi nila rotational naman daw at hindi daw ang rotational daw ang deployment of troops at hindi naman daw permanent structure ang EDCA bases. But these are just justification. Ang tanong, how come it na yung rotational mo? Wala naman specific time. Basta rotational lang. And then EDCA basis, hanggang kailan yan? Ang tanong kasi dyan, pag nandyan na lahat yan sa bansa natin, tapos the United States has this plan of waging a war with with China, the country, one of the country na pwedeng maging launching pad niyan is the Philippines. In Asia Pacific, ang United States has huge military bases in certain countries. Japan, South Korea, and also the Philippines. Before, panahon ni Duterte, hindi tayo kasama dun sa kanilang war games. Kasi neutral nga si Digong. Ayaw niya. Doon may EDCA basis ka na, he did not agree na magkaroon ka pa ng additional. He was very vocal about it. Ngayon, may additional ka na, pwede full implement ang EDCA, kasama na tayo sa war games ng United States. Kaya kung magkakaroon ng gitgitan dyan sa Asia Pacific, dito sa Asia Pacific, ang pagmulan man yan is the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait, kasama tayo dyan. Kasi hindi naman tayo neutral. Una tayong tatargetin kasi nandito sa atin ang bases. Of course, Japan will be a target and of course South Korea. But ang ano kasi sa war, ano kasi sa military, kung sino ang unang nag-launch, di ba, ginamit tayo ng United States, sa atin nang galing ang first strike. Tayo nag-first strike. Pero hindi naman tayo yun eh. Ginamit lang tayo kasi nandito yung military base nila eh. O tayo ang unang nag-first strike. O sa tingin mo, kanino mag-strike back ang China? Sa United States o sa Pilipinas? Of course, sa Pilipinas. Alam naman doon sa kanila sa kabilang ibayo ng Pacific. So yun ang sinasabi ko. Hindi siya not necessarily tayo. But since may base sila sa atin, marami-rami na rin, hindi man natin gusto na gawin nila yon, pero they have the base there, here in the country.
Correct.
Kapag tayo ang unang, tayo din ang unang titirahin. Do you really think we will exist? It will not take China 30 minutes. It's less than 1 hour. Many of our places will burn into ash. No, I'm not kidding. So yun ang sinasabi ko, hindi ba nila naintindihan to? At napaka-critical ng sitwasyon kasi masyadong tension-driven ang Taiwan Strait between China and the United States. Ang South China Sea is tension-driven din. Dahil disputed nga. So, kung tension-driven yan, bakit sumasaw-saw ka sa tension? When supposed to be dapat, aalis ka sa tension kasi baka masali ka sa tension. Okay. Yun yung wise move eh. But what will happening to the Philippines, imbis na umiwas ka, sumusulong ka, parang kumunoy, imbis na iwasan mo siya, release ka ng landas kasi kumunoy eh. Ang nangyayari sa atin, dumadive tayo dun sa kumunoy. It's a suicide on our side. So yun yung sinasabi ko.
Tama ka dyan, Prof. Ana, kasi para bang inaano mo, tawag dito, sinasawsaw mo yung sarili mo na dapat hindi. Diba? Pero
kasi pwede namang hindi eh. Pwede namang hindi.
Pero ang tanong dito, Prof. Ana, kasi isipin mo ha, alam naman natin na yung issue, yung Taiwan Strait nasa ulunan lang natin. Diba?
Oo, malapit lang.
Napakalapit lang sa atin. Di ba nila naiisip nung ating mga mambabatas yan at ang Pangulong Bongbong Marcos? Hindi ko alam na kumbaga, eto bang 82 million na sinasabing infrastructure investment sa mga para sa existing 5 sites daw ng EDCA at investment para suportahan yung economic growth at job creation dito raw sa bansa natin. Diyan pa sila nasisilaw. Pero hindi ba nila alam baliwala lahat yan kung magsimula yung gera? Diba?
82 million is not even a big amount of money compared to other countries na pinupondohan ng United States. Look at how they fund the war in Ukraine. How many millions and millions of dollars, hindi lang 82. Pero ang tanong, at what expense? At what expense? Look at Ukraine. They are financing Ukraine war by supplying them with arms and millions of US dollars yan. Billions pa nga ata na umabot yan eh. Pero ang tanong, at what expense? Do you really want that? I mean, yun yung tanong eh, na para bang, sandali muna. I mean, kailangan siguro natin mag-reflect at mag-isip-isip. Ito ba talaga ang direksyon na dapat natin tahakin? At saka one thing that you have to remember in geopolitics, no? Look at Asia Pacific. For millions of years or sometimes thousands of years, ang Asia Pacific is Asia Pacific. Ang katabi mong bansa ay katabi mong bansa mula noon hanggang ngayon. Ang tanong, ang Pilipinas ba gustong magkaroon ng forever conflict and forever not good relation with China? Do you really think China will vacate its position in the geography na papunta yan sa ibang kontinente? Of course not. It will be there forever until the earth exists at ang geography mo ay ganyan, nag-change din yan, pero the exact location will always be neighbor tayo. Mag-neighbor talaga tayo. Hindi yan mababago. Ang geography hindi nababago ng ganun-ganun kadali. It will take thousands of years before it changes. So ang tanong ko, do we really want to have a neighbor na medyo hindi natin kasundo at medyo galit sa atin dahil sa ganitong mga decision making ng ating gobyerno? For the next 100 of years and 200 of years? Of course not. Kasi dapat ang if you really is wise enough, ang nangyayari kasi dapat dyan, you establish good relation, especially with your neighbors. Yung inner circle mo, then outer circle and outer. So ang inner circle mo dito sa Asia is ASEAN, because we're part of ASEAN. Outside of ASEAN, you have the East Asia or the wider Asia Pacific. So you have to have good relation with China, India, and other countries in Asia. Kasi nandito sila sa atin. Hindi naman sila magbabago in terms of location, geographically. Hanggang thousands of years or hundreds of years pa, nandyan talaga sila. So you have to have that very nice and very amiable relationship to a greater extent. Pero hindi ko sinasabi na ang relationship natin with other countries will not have challenges. It will always have challenges. Lahat naman ng relationship may challenges at may mga conflict na nangyayari talaga kahit nga sa mag-asawa, hindi kayo nagkakaintindihan. Minsan, mag-boyfriend, kahit mag-best friend, may conflict talaga. Pero ang tanong, do you really want to resolve it in a way na magkakagalit kayo forever at hindi na kayo magkakasundo or galit sa'yo yung isa na sobrang galit sa'yo? Of course not. It's not a healthy environment and we will suffer from it in the long run. So yun yung sinasabi ko, why is it that this is not a hard thing to understand. This is not rocket science. It's logic and common sense. So this common sense has to be factored in the way we deal with different countries, especially sa neighboring countries natin. Kasi neighbor mo yan eh. Gusto mo ba na ang neighbor mo laging ready to attack you dahil sobrang galit sa'yo sa nangyari? Halimbawa ngayon, may nangyari in the long run, in the future. Galit sila sa'yo, syempre, di ba? Gusto mo ba yun? Of course not. Para kang insecure niyan lagi. Hindi ka mapakali. Kasi nga, for mo yan eh. So, ang dapat dyan is establish good relationship with your neighbor. If you have conflict and differences, resolve it negotiation-wise, diplomatic-wise, and all. And then, try to negotiate. Mahirap man, pero you pursue. Kasi gano'n naman talaga ang buhay. Wala namang madali kung gusto mo ng napakagandang result. Lahat naman pinaghihirapan eh. So yun. Pero sa nangyayari ngayon, yung foreign policy natin, parang gusto natin ng forever enemy eh.
Tama ka. Parang gusto natin laging may kaaway no? But anyway,
mahirap yan.
Meron akong sasabihin pa after that, pero bigyan ko muna ng pagkakataon si Carlo EY, no, na kasi kanina pa siya nag-raise ng hand. Kasama natin siya sa Zoom. Okay, Carlo, bigyan kita ng pagkakataon para magtanong kay Professor Anna. Carlo? Go ahead, Carlo.
Hello po. So possible ba nitong Prof. Anna, no? Ay posible ba mauwi sa nuclear ang nangyayari sa atin? At dapat yata siguro isama sa isipin natin ng Taiwan dahil neighbor natin yan eh. At yan ang isa sa nalaman kong pinag-ugatan ng gulo dyan eh. Kaya dapat, yan ang isang tanong at dapat na observation ko rin yan at babantayan natin muna. Salamat po.
Well, ang sagot ko naman sa'yo, sa awa ng Diyos, sana wag mauwi sa ganun. Because pag sinabi mong nuclear war, that is really not good in every possible imagination that you can think of. Wala talaga. Kasi pag nuclear war, wala nang survival. Wala na. Lahat tayo na. Hindi lang tayo, hindi lang Pilipinas. Buong mundo ang apektado dyan kasi nuclear yan eh. Pero yun nga sinasabi ko, the threat of a nuclear war is there. Precisely because yung two contending powers na meron are both nuclear states. China has nuclear weapons. The United States has. Even Russia has. Kaya nga, di ba, nakaalala nyo, nagkaroon ng parang State of the Nation address si President Putin, I think 2 days ago. At sinabi niya na, 2 days ago, di ba, sinabi niya na, if NATO, with the United States, of course, pag ginit-git nila kami, gagamitan ko sila. Parang gano'n ang sabi niya. The nuclear option is there. So nakakatakot yun. Kasi kahit nandun sila sa Europe, pag sinabi mong nuclear ng pag-usapan, lahat tayo apektado niyan. The whole earth will be in danger. So ang ano natin dyan is we should not even think about it. It should not even be an option. It should not be an option as much as possible by countries. But the problem nga, kapag ang isang bansa ay na-push to the wall ka na, yun ang mahirap eh. If you naka-push to the wall ng isang bansa, and they don't have an option anymore, and they are pressed to the wall, ang mangyayari dyan, they can possibly take that option because they have the capability to take that option, like Russia. And we don't want that to happen. Pero if you ask me if there's a possibility of that, yes, there is. It's always a possibility. Kaya nga, di ba, gusto natin na the Ukraine crisis should be resolved immediately, it should be de-escalate. The two countries should go to the negotiating table, talk for peace, and for peace to establish na para mawala na yung gulo at magkaroon na ng pag-uusap, negotiation, agreement kung ano man dapat i-agree. Kasi nga, the possibility of a nuclear war is there. And it's not something that we can even think about. It's unthinkable. Kasi magugunaw tayo lahat dito. Kung ganyan na, nuclear yan.
Yung extension yan, Prof. Ana, pag yan ang iniisip mo na nuclear war, it's human extension.
Yes, actually.
Nakagad yun. Diba? And ano nga, Prof. Ana, bagamat merong ilang mga rally na ginagawa tungkol dito sa EDCA, no? Last week, merong nga ginanap na anti-war rally sa Washington, D.C. na tinagurihan nila na rage against the war machine. Maraming mga importanteng tao yung nagsalita dyan, kasama yung mga dating kongresista ng Estados Unidos, pati mismo US, maraming mga Amerikano na ayaw ng gera. So, siyempre tayo dito sa Pilipinas, di ba dapat magkaroon tayo ng ganito anti-war rally na katulad ng Estados Unidos? Pero bakit walang ingay, meron mang ilan nagrarally, pero bakit hindi inaano ng mainstream media natin? 'Di ba?
Kasi
ang parang itinutulak ng mainstream media natin is magalit tayo sa China. Sa atin, i-welcome natin ang Estados Unidos, ang pagpasok ng mga base militar, at talagang binabandera pa natin na parang tuwang-tuwa tayo sa mga Amerikanong sundalo. Ano ba yun? Di ba naiisip ng mainstream na ano ba kayo, gera na to? Di ba?
Yun na nga, yun. Yun na nga hindi ko maintindihan sometimes because ang ating mainstream media is very much co-opted by the West, I think, and by the Americans in many ways, I think. That's the problem. And sometimes I think there are just few media networks or media entity na medyo independent ang kanilang reporting at medyo balanse ang kanilang pag-uulat or programming as well. So, but most of our media, especially the mainstream, are co-opted and very much leaning towards the West, or especially the United States. Well, nire-reinforce nila ang Western propaganda and the American propaganda. Na actually, kung tutuusin, ito yung nagpo-poison sa mind ng maraming Pilipino na hindi nag-iisip ng malalim at hindi tinitignan yung issue from different angles and different sides. Na isa lang ang pag narinig mo na, oh, ganito, ganyan, may propaganda, anti-China propaganda, absorb agad. Hindi muna inisip na, sandali muna, propaganda ba to? Ito ba ang totoo? Or tignan ko nga muna yung ibang sources of information, kung tama, i-cross-check ko and all that. So may mga Pilipino tayo, sadly, na kababayan na wala na silang effort to double-check information. Kaya ang nangyayari, they already have that kind of conclusion and kind of perception na madaling magamit naman ng mga tulad ng mga amboys and amgirls sa Pilipinas na i-persuade sila to have this kind of negative sentiments against another country. But the problem with that is yun ang kinakapitalize naman ng mga Amerikano para ma-justify nila ang kanilang mga plano sa Pilipinas na hindi maganda. So yun yung problema. Kasi at the end of the day, ang masasabi ko lang, ang Pilipinas is we claim to be a democratic state. Now, if we claim to be a democratic state, the decision supposedly of the government should be based on the sentiments and what is the sentiments of majority of Filipinos or the whole Filipinos. Ang problema, dahil doon sa ganyang klaseng struktura politically, kailangan mo ng maraming Pilipino na magsasabi at magagamit mo to justify something like EDCA bases. So ang yun ang nangyayari. So the intensification of the information war in the country and the Western propaganda is heightened up because that's also one way of trying to justify whatever the decision ng gobyerno natin in coordination or in following the foreign policy, let us say, ng United States, na masasabi mo na ito yung gusto rin ng mga Pilipino, karamihan ng Pilipino. Pero ang tanong, ang karamihan ba dyan is naiintindihan nila talaga ang issue ng malinaw o malalim? Alam ba nila ang implications sa mga yan? But of course, hindi na rin natin masisisi ang ating mga kababayan sometimes na napupulyot ang kanilang mind sa mga Western propaganda precisely because ang media natin are doing the same thing. Karamihan ng media entity talaga is they're promoting and they're reinforcing the Western propaganda. So yun ang problema. So hindi mo rin masisi ang ating mga kababayan kasi yun ang una nilang naririnig eh. Kapag bumukas ka ng TV, yun agad ang bungad sa'yo. Pag nagbukas ka ng Google, if you look at Google, nauuna agad ang mga ganyang media entity eh. And pag halimbawa nag-Facebook ka naman, nandun din sila. So alam mo yun yung nare-reinforce eh. So ang problema dyan, ang misperception is reinforced as well. Like for example, inuulit-ulit sa media, the West Philippine Sea is ours. The West Philippine Sea is Philippines ours. It's our territory. That is a misconception and deception because you don't own the West Philippine Sea. You own only the 12 nautical miles from the shore. That's your territorial waters. You have sovereignty over that. Beyond that, you don't. You only have what you call 200 nautical miles after what you call sovereign rights. Sovereign right is not equivalent to sovereignty. So, kung titignan mo sa Western media, ang kanilang headlines lagi or the way they use the words, it confuses the Filipino people. So, sinasabi na natin ngayon na atin yan. So makipagdigmaan na tayo, kinakamkam nila ang ating territory. Sandali. Hindi naman ganun ang usapin dyan eh. We don't own that area. We have sovereign right. And sovereign rights and sovereignty are not the same. How can you not explain that if you're a responsible media entity? Magkaiba yon. Kaya nga, katapos, yun yung sinasabi ko. Kaya ang nangyayari sa utak ng mga Pilipino, may misperception. Hindi mo sila masisisi. Karamihan ng Pilipino din. Kasi yun ang nare-reinforce. Sa media natin. Which is misperception. And deception yan eh.
Correct.
Ang ano ko lang dyan is ganito. I am okay to fight for what is right for the Philippines. I don't have question about that. But it should be based on truth. It should be based on real and objective reality. Not deception and misperception. Kasi to fight for something that is based on deception, you will end up in a disaster. But if you fight something that is based on truth and based on objectivity, then you will be successful. Yun yung dapat nating isipin. To fight
Oo.
for what is ours is a good thing, and it's really an important thing. I would fight for it, but I would fight for something that is real and truth, not something na
Correct.
dinideceive ka. Mahirap yun. We will be a
Oo.
laughing stock in the international community if that's the case. Diba?
Anyway,
Yun yung problema.
yes, tama ka doon na Professor Ana. But bigyan ko lang ng pagkakataon si Ed Litoral na magtanong kasama natin sa Zoom, Prof. Ana. Ed, sige, you can go ahead. Ano po yung inyong paki-unmute. Pwede po kayong
Ang bilis
magtanong.
ng oras ha, 8:26 na.
Hello,
Okay.
magandang gabi po.
Magandang gabi.
Makisabad na po kasi talagang Zoom ito interactive, di po ba? So, agree po ako sa mga sinasabi nyo. Yung pong, kumbaga, yung topic nyo ngayon is mas kayo dun sa sovereignty about sa West Philippine Sea. Pero, maganda po yung point nyo, yung maraming propaganda, maraming lies na naisaksak sa atin. Pero kayo po ba at marami po talagang sa bawat aspeto na maraming aspeto na mga kasinungalingan na sa buong mundo na parang kaguluhan ang dala. Ang isa ko pong gustong sabihin lang na halimbawa ako po ay nandun sa rally last Monday nila yung grupo ni Nick Perlas. Ang kanila po namang kwan dito is ito ang pagpasok naman para sa akin naman personal kong pananaw, pagpasok ng mga dayuhan sa polisiya natin. Nakita po nila, andyan pa po ba? Okay po ba?
Oh, go ahead.
Opo, go ahead lang po.
Kasi andun po ako noong Monday. Ang strength po nung nakita ko doon na personal ko po ito, pumapasok sa polisiya natin ang World Health o mga dayuhan, modern slavery, pinapasok nila ang institusyon natin na ang atin namang mga leader na inaasahan natin na makakaunawa kukunin na tayo, winawalang yan na tayo pag naisa batas nila yan, nagpipirmahan na ata ang mga walang yang senador na bakit itong mga ordinaryong tao, mga lawyer din naman nakikita may maraming butas na pag ito ay naging batas mas masahol pa ito sa unang lockdown. Naniniwala din po ako, ito po personal ko na to sa after 2 years na mga nagdaan na to. Ang COVID po talaga is not kwan po lang yan, propaganda. Sabi ng World Doctor Alliance, walang pandemic. Walang pandemic, kumbaga propaganda ito ng mga kung sino man.
Utuloy kita, Eda, kasi bali ang tinutukoy mo ay yung pagsasabatas, yung proposed na HB, Senate Bill, di ba? 6522 ba to na sinasabi mo? Pag-usapan natin yan sa ibang panahon tungkol sa topic natin ngayon kasi out of context tayo. And so please take note lang sa mga yung SB 1869. Yung yan yata yung tinutukoy mo. Talakayin natin yan sa ibang pagkakataon. I know that it is also one of the critical issues ng ating bansa. Naintindihan ko yan, I am with you. But this time, lahat yan useless. Lahat ng mga laban na ginagawa natin, lahat ng mga issues na yan ay magiging useless. Kung magkakaroon ng gera, dahil lahat yan tapos. Diba?
Oo, wala yan eh.
So, diba, Prof. Ana, it will be useless lahat ng mga issues. Ito yung talagang nasa bingit na na para bang sabi mo nga pushing to the wall di ba? Parang ginigit mo so sino man tao nagipitin mo, bansa man yan o grupo, naturally lalaban yan, kakasal.
Lalaban talaga kasi survival lang. Survival yan
Exactly. So I will just give way. And I'm sorry, pinutol kita. We will talk in some other time on that. And I will give way to Johnny Ventosa. Mang Johnny, magandang gabi.
Magandang gabi po, sir. Nakamute ata si sir.
Johnny? Yeah, nakamute pa kasi siya. By the way, it's already 8:30 na po ng gabi at Philippine Standard Time. Kayo po ay nakikinig pa rin dito sa himpilan po ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz at sabayan niyo po kami napapanood sa pamamagitan ng social media accounts ng Katipunan Channel o Partido KDP. Makikita niyo po kami sa FB page at YouTube account po ng Partido KDP. And please like, share, and subscribe po. Kahit ipasa nyo po rin sa mga i-share nyo sa inyong mga kaibigan, kamag-anak, kaaway. Bigay nyo rin. Diba?
Yeah, oo, para ma-educate na rin.
Okay, go ahead, mga Johnny.
Professor.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to, now that the president has done all this about the EDCA, is there any way he can change his mind?
Yes, that is a very, very important and good question po, Sir Johnny. It's just that ganito naman, actually, the president can make decisions and we are a sovereign state, actually. Kung titignan mo lang yung tinatawag mong we are a sovereign state because we are at the end of the day. I think he can. But the problem is like this. Kasi pinasok niya yan eh. Yun nga sinasabi ko lagi eh. It's very hard for a government like ours na pumasok ka, hindi mo nakita lahat or nag-gamble ka or you take a risk. Kasi ngayon, kaya naman niyang bawiin yan. Kasi actually ang EDCA, ang kanyang mag-expire dapat yan and nandun tayo sa decision making if we will push for it or we will withdraw from it or we will abrogate it. Ngayong darating na April 28, yun yung crucial time. Kaya nga may kuro-kuro na pupunta ata ang ating mahal na Pangulo sa, how do you call that, sa United States. Probably that's one of the reason. Pag-uusapan yan or kung done deal na rin yan na diretso na yung EDCA for another ilang years na naman. Pwede naman po. Ang problema lang, it will have a backlash on him. Kasi, ibig sabihin, magkakaproblema tayo with the United States. And not only the Philippines, but it's much more the president will have a problem with the United States. Kasi pinasok niya, tapos babawiin mo. Yun nga sinasabi ko eh. Dapat kasi, before ka mag-agree, hindi mo na, inayos muna yan eh, pinag-aralan ng mabuti at tinansya kung yan ba talaga ang dapat gawin o hindi. Pero kung talagang gugustuhin ng ating mahal ng Pangulo na bawiin yan at sabihin, sandali, nagkamali kami, hindi namin tuloy yan kasi of these issues and the people doesn't want it and blah, blah, blah. Pwede po, kasi nasa kamay niya yan eh. Nasa kamay niya naman talaga yan eh. Pero, I would also say na from the way I see it, it will have a backlash on him. And the United States will not be very happy about it. And we know what the United States. Kilala naman natin ang United States. Pag ang United States ay hindi happy sa'yo, they will do something about it. So yun lang yun. Pero if the Filipino people will back up the president and would say, we will stand by you kapag binawi mo yan at hindi yan nakakabuti sa Pilipinas, I think the president can stand. And I think he will survive politically. Because at the end of the day, it's the people that is important. Backing him up in the right decisions. Yun yung tingin ko lang po.
The people are so quiet. The people are so...
Yes po. Totoo ka dyan, Sir Johnny. I'm really disappointed a little bit.
Totally complacent.
Yes, I would agree with you, sir. I would agree. And I feel really sad about these things. I'll be very honest po. Very sad.
But I agree with you that really, if he does that, he will really get the ire of the United States. But
yes po, totoo yun.
What do you call this? Duterte did it.
Yes.
He said Obama in his heights, he sent him to go fly a kite.
Yes.
And no matter what he did, he stood path and the people were for him.
Yes, yes, yes. I agree totally.
But the point is that this president just goes around doing things, not explaining everything to the people, and thinking that the people are in agreement with him. I don't think we are. We don't
No,
want
we
to
are
die.
not. I don't agree.
We don't want to die.
Yes.
We don't want to die just because he's favoring the U.S. My God, the U.S. is a war machine.
Yes.
China is not a war machine. I would much rather be an ally of China. At least they won't lead us to war.
Yes, that one thing true.
I mean,
Sumasakit ang ulo ni Ma'am Johnny, no? Alam mo,
Oo, kasi tama naman ang sinasabi niya.
Talaga, Prof. Ana, di ba?
Oo, tama naman si Sir Johnny na I mean, if you make a decision, a decisive one that is good for the country and for the national interest of the country, you may you may have that whatever angry, probably Uncle Sam will get angry with you. But at the end of the day, the people is with you. Sino bang mas importante? Ang Pilipino, sila na maaaring mainis sa'yo. Kasi mainis talaga kung babawiin mo. Pero ano ba? Sino ba ang importante? Sila na mainis sa'yo? Or mairita sa'yo? Or ang Pilipino na kailangan mong pangalagaan ang kapakanan at ang Pilipinas? You have to make a choice. And what is the choice?
Prof. Ana, yan ang sinumpaang tungkulin ni President Bongbong Marcos. Diba?
Precisely.
Na yung protektahan ang kapakanan ng sambayanang Pilipino. Yun ang sinumpaan niyang tungkulin. Kaya nga nakakapagtaka na kakaiba yung kanyang naging decision ngayon, yung turnaround ng kanyang decision. Kasi during the election campaign, ayaw niya ng EDGA, ayaw niya nito. And why all of a sudden, anong meron? Siguro, ano ko lang to, kutub ko lang to, at pagtingin ko lang kung paano naaalala ba niya, naiisip ba niya na baka gawin din sa kanya ang ginawa sa tatay niya, kay President Marcos? Yung ba yung naiisip niya kapag hindi siya pumayag, dahil alam niya na ganun din ang naging reason kung bakit tinidnap ang Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos during those times. Hindi kaya ganun din ngayon? Kaya na parang pikit mata? Professor Ana?
Yun yung mga isa sa mga speculations ng ibang mga kababayan natin na probably iniisip niya siguro na if any case hindi siya pumayag or he would go against the wishes of the United States, baka mangyari sa kanya ang nangyari sa tatay niya. But at least, nangyari man yun kay senior, no? Kay President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. One thing that I would admire forever, and I would always be grateful about that president, even other people does not admire him, is he stood his ground. He stood his ground. He did not allow even yung military bases na yan na patalsik, di ba? There were military bases in the Philippines sa Clark and also dun sa katabi ng Clark. Pinaiksi niya yun Siya yung nagpaiksi nun. Yung military base na hindi na tumagal yan, na nagkaroon ng 5 years na lang. Si Ferdinand yun He was trying to make the country an independent one. He was trying his best. But of course, the pressure from the America was strong on the father, on Ferdinand Marcos Sr. But one thing that we need to remember, he stood his ground. At least sinabi niya na hindi kami na pwede dyan. Like yung MDT nyo, magde-decide kayo sa Congress, kami namamatay na dito. Magde-decide pa lang kayo. Pag didebatihan nyo pa, kami dito binabakbak na. At least, alam mo yun, mayroon siyang ganong wisdom. And he stood. Though at the end, of course, pinatalsik siya kasi he's not anymore aligning himself with the foreign policy or hindi na siya gustong maging tuta ng Amerikano. And that one is admirable. In exchange to that, na regime change siya. At pinalitan siya ng Mrs. Aquino. Pero at least yun admirable. Kasi bakit? at the end of the day, meron siyang ganong perception that the country is important. The welfare of the country, and the country cannot be a subservient for the rest of its life to a superpower. It has to stand on its own 2 feet, and it has to develop in its own, and it has to protect its national interests, and it cannot be the forever defense and security outpost of America in the Asia-Pacific region. At least he has that vision, and that vision has to be continued and has to be reinforced by the current generation. Our generation at the moment, his generation. Kasi yun yung vision ng father eh. Doon mahirap, siguro, I mean, I think the old Marcos, I mean, was having difficulty, but at least may vision siya na the Philippines should be a really independent and sovereign state. And that vision has to be pushed forward by the current and by this generation and then the generation to come. Filipinos, generation of Filipinos to come in this. Kasi ganun naman dapat ang mangyari sa atin. And we have to protect our national interests, that the country will survive and the country will persist for the long term. Now, we relate with all countries based on our national interests. We don't have enemy. Even the United States can be a friend, but we dictate the terms. They don't dictate the terms. We dictate the terms. But that is a difficult job, I think. I understand. For a president, but at least he needs to do something about it. Alam mo yun? Kasi kapag hindi niya ginawa yan, then what will happen to this country? What will happen to this country in the long run? Do you really think it will still I mean, ang hirap eh. So, forever tayong new colony. You really want that for a country that you will be forever a new colony, and you would always be there would always be a possibility that you will be used as a proxy and a pawn by another country? Of course not. That is a sad reality for the Philippines. And of course I don't want that to happen. But sad to say, yan nangyayari na ngayon. So yan, problema. Diba? Problema. That's a big challenge actually for Filipinos.
Exactly.
Alam mo, ang ngayon is nasa kamay ng Pilipino. Kaya nga, sabi ko nga, kanina sabi ni Sir Johnny, ang problema nga, tahimik. Wala man lang nakikita ng alingas-ngas about dito, an opposition, really that you can feel that there's such a thing as an opposition, which is so sad. Kasi before, pag sinabi mo anti-military bases ng foreign troops dito, makikita mo talaga yung activism na we oppose it, we can see people speaking about it. But now, quiet. Mayroon naman iba, very iilan na they're really expressing opposition to it. Pero the majority of Filipinos are quiet about it. And even our policymakers, our politicians are so quiet about these things. I think they don't want to offend the president or the Malacanang. You know what I mean? So parang ang sad lang ng reality na nangyayari sa Pilipinas na this is already an issue of sovereignty. This is all about sovereignty issue. Ano ba talaga tayo? Are we a sovereign state? Are we an independent state or not? Kasi huwag na tayong maglukuhan kung hindi. Kasi mahirap yun, niluloko mo sarili mo kapag ganyan. Yun yung mga tanong na dapat nire-reflect ng bawat Pilipino. Are we really a sovereign state or are we a pawn? Yun eh. Mag-decide tayo, ano ba talaga gusto natin? Gusto ba natin maging sovereign and independent or gusto natin maging new colony and maging a pawn? Di ba? Para alam natin, hindi tayo naglulukuhan dito, di ba? I'm sorry, I'm just posing a question and a very provocative question to the audience, I think. Yeah.
Alam mo, Prof. Ana, tama lang yung alam mo yung damdamin na talagang ng pag-aalala, parang magulang ka na paano na yung mga anak natin, 'di ba? Paano na yung susunod na henerasyon?
Oh,
sa kanila. Are we thinking of the future of the next generation? Wala na tayong nadaratnan. Dahil human extinction na mangyayari sa atin.
Oh, di ba? Yun eh.
May nagtatanong nga sa Zoom, sabi nga niya, does the Philippines allow China to set up military facilities? And
no.
West Philippine Sea, sabi ni tinatanong ni Jeffrey, Prof. Ana.
Actually, if you look at the South China Sea, sabi ko nga sa iyo, ang Pilipinas may kiniklaim tayong mga islands na yung islands na occupied. China also has an occupied islands na kanilang ni-reclaim at ginagawan nila ng temporary parang artificial island. Vietnam is the same. Actually, dapat tingnan niyo yung Vietnam, wag na yung China. Kasi kung sa South China Sea pag-uusapan, ang pinaka active diyan na nagtatayo ng mga reclaim at saka artificial islands na ginagawang military installation are actually the Vietnamese. Ngayon nga nag-expand ang Vietnamese ng kanilang mga occupied islands and modernizing it and expanding it the military side. So yun yung dapat yung tignan kasi yun yung nakakatakot. Ang China, they also have it. But one thing you have to remember, China is on a defensive mode. Defensive yan. Defensive mode yan. It's not an offensive thing na like they are, let's say, may mga nagsasabi na they occupied one island and they kind of have an artificial island in there and they kind of put something in there na like for example, a runway or may runway daw doon sa kanila, isa sa mga occupied island ng China sa South China Sea, may runway. One thing you have to remember, they are in a defensive mode precisely because there is a threat to their existence. It's an existential threat kasi yung nangyayari sa kanila dahil they're being threatened by an impending war against them by the United States. So of course, as a country, they need to protect themselves and they need to do something to protect and to survive. That is the reason why. It's not about us Philippines. Do you really think China will invade us? Ano naman kung ako ang China, why would I invade the Philippines? Ang dami nating problema sa country. Do you really think the Chinese are not wise enough to add problems to their problems? Of course not. Hindi sila ganun. Very rational mag-isip ang mga Chinese. So, yung tinatawag nilang, yung sinasabi nila na may artificial island daw ang China, mayroon talaga. Ang Vietnamese mayroon. Mayroon din naman tayong occupied islands. Mayroon din naman ang Brunei. Mayroon din ang Taiwan, China. Mayroon din ang ibang claimant state dyan. Ang tanong lang dyan, occupied nila yan. So they will do whatever they want to that occupied island. Ang tanong, you provoke them. The more you provoke them, the more they do something to build their deterrence capacity and defense capacity. Kasi you threaten them eh. Ganun talaga yan. It's really a natural thing. Ang mapag-usapan man is human beings or countries because they have to defend themselves. So yun yung sinasabi ko. So if you want a peaceful South China Sea, then we have to come up with a mechanism na mag-agree ang mga claimant state dyan na middle ground, na agree. And middle ground, you strike a middle ground, not a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game is akin to, sa'yo yan, akin. Walang ganun, hindi ka magkakaroon ng kapayapaan dyan. You need to strike a middle ground that is agreeable among claimant states. And then, yun dyan lang talaga ang way out dyan sa conflict na yan. And the conflict cannot be resolved overnight. It will take some time. Probably not even in my generation. But ang importante kasi sa South China Sea na issue is it will not be used as a ground for a military conflict among countries. It should be resolved peacefully and diplomatically kasi masalimuot yan. Sobrang salimuot na I don't even think, even in our generation, mariresolve yan na sasabihin mo, sa Pilipinas to, sa China to, sa Vietnamese to. I don't think. But ang importante talaga dyan is countries will come up with a middle ground, maiwasan ang malaking conflict militarily speaking, mayroon mga differences and skirmishes, but it can be resolved diplomatically, and then people or countries from different claimant states should talk to each other openly and honestly and politely. And the media should not have this kind of propaganda na lalong gumugulo dahil sa propaganda against one country over another country. Nagkakagulo na, nagkakaroon ng tinatawag mong megaphone diplomacy na hindi nakakatulong.
Mas lumalala.
Lumalala, kasi ginagatungan mo eh. Diba? Yung fire.
ang sagot sa suliranin niyan, Professor Ana, ay yung sinasabi nga, I always remember what Professor Butch Valdes always say. Etong the principle of advantage of the other. The principle of the Treaty of Westphalia, diba?
Oo.
Meron na sa kasaysayan na nangyari to. Matagal na gera. Pero sa anong ground sila nagkasundo? Diba? Development, pagkakaisa para sa kabutihan ng bansa. Kung nagawa nila yon noon, bakit hindi natin magagawa ngayon?
Kasi nga, mayroon kang isang country dyan na gusto ng gulo. Gusto talaga ng gulo.
Anyway, bigyan natin.
War freak talaga.
Iwan na po ng gabi. Philippine Standard Time, kayo po ay nanonood pa rin dito sa aming social media accounts ng Katipunan Channel, FB page, and YouTube account. At sabayan niyo po kaming napapakinggan sa pamagitan po ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz. Bigyan natin ang huli pagkakataon, very short, si Sir Jeffrey. Magandang gabi po sa iyo. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I couldn't unmute myself. Pero, well, good points to raise. But first, the Philippines isn't the only one silent. Other countries are. So it's an international phenomenon. And it also shows the extent by which the media, both social and mainstream, is controlled. Now, with regard to the West Philippine Sea, don't forget that in the last months of Duterte, China tried to set up another facility with 200 so-called fishing vessels. And somehow mysteriously, they just packed up and left, and even donated 2 million Sinovac kits to the Philippines in the process, which means that Duterte at that time must have had China by the balls. And he's not saying why, which is good, because better to keep quiet. We can only speculate. But my point really is there are non-military solutions to military problems. That's one. Second is, I think here in Australia, and I encourage Australia and New Zealand to join. Number one, join the ASEAN, because it's better to be closer to one's neighbors than to distant cousins like the UK and the US, who will defend themselves before they defend Australia. But the other thing is, I think we also have to encourage a wider participation of the Austronesian, Melanesian, Polynesian, and Micronesian islands. That it isn't so much that the question shouldn't be raised as to who owns the seas, but the seas must belong to everyone with equality in rights. Because right now, the least able to protect the rights in the said waters are people who have no sense of nationhood, which is the seafaring people of the Bajau and other indigenous peoples. Now, I think one thing is, we as ASEAN, the rights of the most defenseless should be upheld. I don't like the way the Chinese are harassing Filipino fishermen, for instance. I think that's a reason for complaint. But I don't like the US. I don't like EDSA either, EDCA. I think I do agree we should assert our, not just sovereignty, but our independence and infantile dependence on a foreign power, whether it be the US or China. That's my comment.
Okay, Sir
I
Jerry,
agree.
thank you, no? Very short lang. We only have 5 minutes. Ang dami nating babasahin ng message. Nako, Diyos ko, Lord.
But I agree with I agree with Sir Joffrey. I agree with him.
Okay. Okay, it's time to read the text messages. sent by our listeners. The opinion does not necessarily reflect our own, but we reserve the right to read them to the public in the interest of freedom of speech. Okay, ako hindi na natin mababasa siguro lahat, but we will try, no? Sabi ni Freddy Oredina, 113 billion USD sent to Ukraine plus 10 billion asked by Yellen. Sabi naman ni Belinda Karina Buco, nako, nagka-clap-clap siya. Sabi ni Marie Arellano Puliado, mapagpalang gabi po. Magandang gabi rin. Benjamin Gutierrez, gandang gabi. Present si Freddy Oredina. Sabi naman ni Jinky Bill, watching from Germany. At sabi ni Alfredo Oredina, join BRICS and kick out greedy oligarchs on managing public utilities. We do not need their money. Top AIIB and the CIIB. At sabi ni Tash Madriaga, good evening po, watching from General Trias, Cavite. And good evening daw, sabi rin ni Ann Cutis. Sabi ni Edith Santa Maria, naku ma'am, Ana, maraming Pinoy na bulag. Kasasamba, o sumasamba siguro kay Bobo Marcos. And ang di nakakaintindi sa usaping EDCA. Sabi naman ni Amparo Consuelo, anong meron? Quick evacuation ng mga officials at mga kamag-anak bago pa man magsasabog ang mga parating na mga missile. Magandang gabi sa inyo. Sabi naman ni Winnie Donaire, good evening. At sabi ni Anasela Watson, sabi niya, yes, Madam Proxy War, kaya BBM, isip-isip. Si BBM parang si Biden, hilo. Iba naman ang expected natin na BBM binoto ng 31 million. Ano nangyari? Ano, naka-drugs? Ang president natin? Question mark yan. Wala ba psychology ang presidente natin na narcissistic like her first lady? Mongolia colonized China. Genghis Khan? Yes, Madam, teach Filipino to own their sovereignty. Old U.S. government were down. Those are show-off power, but U.S. old government was done. Sabi naman ni Boyet Peria Bras, good evening mga ka-DDS at katipon. Wala na dahil sa katangahan ng ating mga leaders, nagpagamit sa mga puti, sabit na ang Pilipinas sa gera ng Kano from Subic. Nanonood daw po siya. At sabi ni Reggie Maluloy on Avenito, good evening po, Prof. Ana and Ma'am Cathy. Sabi naman ni Felicidad Nagata, thank you Ma'am Ana for the information. Kaso maraming mga Pilipino ang bulag. Bongbong is very, very different to his father. Di natin akalain na magiging dilawan ang sariling anak ng isang Marcos Sr. At muli bumabalik sa Alfredo Redina, sabi niya, we will be first target of China. June 9, USA bases making bio-nuclear weapon versus China. Galit na American citizens due inflation, homelessness, etc. and taxpayer money sent to Ukraine. Rage against war machine. Takot si BBM sa regime change or he was promised in relation to frozen wealth. Maharlika Boldi Yakera calls BBM as first gentleman. Sabi naman ni Paulo Melgar, galing mo, Prof. Ayan, may tagahanga ka na, Prof. At sabi ni Adonis Gorero, good evening po, watching from San Pedro, Laguna. Nakapag-aalala po talaga ang sitwasyon. Sana neutral na lang si PBBM at tinututukan ang agriculture, infrastructure at mapababa ang bayaring tubig, kuryente. Sabi naman ni Cesar Soberano, thumbs up to Professor Ana. The military or industrial complex is the sure winner in the Ukraine war. Endless war by the West is lucrative business for the crumbling Anglo/US empire. At nagbabalik si Freddy Oredina, sabi niya ganon, big media here owned by oligarchs, influenced, funded by the West. At sabi naman ni Nel Marquina, correct po, Prof. Hindi ko lang maintindihan to. Hi, Marcy. Kung ikaw man ay pagaling ka. Hindi ko na binasa yung kanyang mensahe. But thank you for watching us. Prof. Ana, last, magbababay na tayo. Thank you. At marami pong salamat, Prof. Ana, no, sa inyong pagsama sa palatuntunang ito. Next time uli. At
yes.
Next time uli, Prof. Ana.
Oo, suki.
Anyway, tayo po ay magpapaalam na at syempre maraming salamat po sa ngalan po ng ating mga katipon dito sa ating Katipunan at sa magagaling na staff ng DZXL Radio Mo nationwide. Kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinamahan ninyo kami ngayon ang oras peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo dito sa ating Katipunan. Hanggang sa linggo po muli mga katipon, alas 7 hanggang alas 9 po ng gabi. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.